And you're trying to give the young people something that will help them, yet you don't know exactly what it ought to be.
Welcome to the TeachThought podcast. Terry, introduce yourself.
My name is Terry Ike. I'm a former classroom teacher and now director at TeachThought, which means I do a lot of different things very badly.
And I'm Drew Perkins. I'm the Director of Professional Development here at TeachThought, and hopefully that means I do a lot of different things really well.
And together we're hosting a podcast, which hopefully makes TeachThought more accessible to you in more places, right, Drew?
Well, hopefully, yeah, but mostly it's just me hosting it because you just add episodes every so often, right?
Well, I've got things to do. Remember, I'm director.
That's true. As always, thanks for tuning into the podcast. My name is Drew Perkins. I am the Director of Professional Development here at TeachThought. And again, before we get to our guest today, I wanted to remind folks that are listening in a timely fashion that registration ends very soon for our summer TeachThought PBO Row 17 event that we're hosting in our hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, July 17th, 18th, 19th. We're very excited to have folks down to the Fraser History Museum downtown Louisville. We have some interesting events around the evenings and in the city that allow you to experience the culture of Louisville in ways that maybe are different from other conferences that are vendor-driven. But we hope that you can make it. The 3 days will be focused on building PBL capacity by doing PBL and actually creating a project for implementation in your classroom. So please jump on over to wegrowteachers.com/grow17, or you can just go to wegrowteachers.com and look along the top. Registration is set to end May 31st. We may extend that by a couple days just because of the long holiday weekend and folks wrapping up the end of school here in the United States. But regardless, it will be ending next week. And if you have a group of 5 or more, you can get group discounts. So we hope you can make it. We're excited to have you and get this inaugural event underway. In today's podcast, I spoke with a friend of mine and a first-year principal, Jennifer Cox, who just finished her first year of principalship, so I thought it would be an interesting conversation to sit down with her and reflect on that first year as a principal. We spoke about her challenges and what she found rewarding, thought about keeping the focus and personalized PD as well as building strong teams, and really just lots of information or conversation, I should say, around cognitive coaching and reciprocal accountability, collaborative leadership, and things like that. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome to the podcast. I am here today in the office for the second in-person TeachThought podcast with first-year principal, actually end of her first year of principalship, Jennifer Cox, a friend of mine, and actually at East Middle School here in Shelby County, Kentucky, and right across the street from where I live. I probably shouldn't say that because now you come stake out my house, but hi, Jennifer. I'm going to be an opportunity to introduce yourself to our listeners, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Actually, I'm very honored because you've had some pretty big names on your podcast.
None bigger than you.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. Anyway, yes, I'm finishing up my first year as principal. I'm in a unique situation because I'm now the principal where I taught. So many of my colleagues have now become staff members where I'm a principal. So that's been an interesting ride. But come from, the classroom. I was an ELA teacher, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and an instructional coach, both here in Shelby County and in Jefferson County. And so now I'm back in Shelby.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I wanted to do this podcast was to give our listeners sort of a reflection on the thoughts of a first-year principal. And so let's kind of dive into that. As a first-year principal, kids walked out of the building which day?
They walked out on Friday.
Okay, so today is Thursday, right?
Yes.
So almost a week ago. and you finished that first year. What was the biggest surprise to you as a principal?
I think the biggest surprise to me as a principal was how quickly the year went. I think time flies when you're having fun, but it also flies when you are in constant learner mode.
Right.
Always having to learn. Every step I made, every month that came was something brand new to learn, some new system, some new, piece of instructional technology that I had to master, or some sort of reporting tool that I had to get used to. So, yes, I think how fast the year went was the biggest surprise.
And so when you moved from, because you didn't come straight from being in this building.
No.
You were at the high school across town, and
Yes.
then you were in Jefferson County for a short time. You did some instructional coaching, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned having worked with some of these people as peers, and not that a principal isn't a peer, because it really is, and we want to think about flattening that hierarchy, but in a most traditional sense, principal is a leadership position, and teachers are teachers, and so there is a dichotomy and a difference there for sure. How did that go, or what are some of the lessons that you learned, I guess, in how you made that transition, and how you worked with those people differently? Or did you? Maybe you didn't. I don't know.
Well, I think one of the things that made the transition easier than it probably could have been is the fact that as an educator, it's part of my philosophy. Transparency. I'm very honest about my struggles. I was with them when I was their peer, and I have been honest and transparent with them with my struggles as a leader also. And so I am not afraid of addressing an elephant in the room. If something is uncomfortable, I name it. I talk about my discomfort with it. I allow and I listen well for other people to talk about what they might be uncomfortable with. And I think creating an environment where that was safe to do, and we could do that in a respectful way, was one of the ways that I made that transition easy. No one had to guess where I stood when it came to student learning. And being forthcoming with that and making all of my decisions from that lens helped my staff to be okay, even if they didn't agree.
Did you, because that transparency is really, really important, and that culture. One of the things that when we talked about this, 2 years ago when you were in a PBO workshop down in E-Town, I would hope that when I facilitated that we talked about that cultural shift, and if not, I should have. Shame on me if I didn't. But
you did.
That is one of those PBL culture pieces that I think is really, really important. Do you think that you drew more from teaching or instructional coaching to get there, or both, or neither?
My training, that's the one thing that I can honestly say Shelby County does so much differently than some surrounding counties. I think other people are picking up on this, but I was so well trained by Shelby County as an instructional coach, having gone through an entire cognitive coaching training, also then going through adaptive schools training. Both of those helped me to do the one thing that I think has helped me in leadership the most, and that was to listen through an empathetic lens that allowed me to understand where someone was coming from, rather than listening so that I could make my peace right afterwards. And I honestly believe that at the heart of being a good, trusting leader, that's something that I've used the most. That's the skill I've used the most.
I think, I don't know if you're familiar with, Paul Bloom wrote a book. It's called Against Empathy. You mentioned empathy. And I think you just mentioned something that he actually hits on. And the book is called Against Empathy. And I think it's dangerous. I mean, it's a controversial title, and he got a lot of pushback because who doesn't think empathy is a good thing, right? On TeachThought, we have a fairly recent article about empathy, and Terry wrote a piece and clarifying the difference between, and you said it, understanding what somebody's going through, and what he mentioned was not that empathy can be a bad thing, not in the sense of understanding what somebody's going through, but in feeling what somebody's going through. And there's some gray area there, but sort of the cognitive empathy versus the emotional empathy, and you can get wrapped up in that because you spend too much time feeling what somebody else is going through, and then you're trying to really solve their problems so that you feel better, as opposed to understanding what they're going through and being clear about that and understanding it so that you can help them get better or feel better or whatever the case may be. I thought that was interesting that you said that. I don't know where I'm going with that, because I've not heard many people make that distinction of understanding that lens. And the cognitive coaching piece, was that the thinking strategies, or was that?
That was cognitive coaching. I took that actually through Dr. Maggie Magatha, who is at U of L. Okay. She came out and trained a group of Shelby County and Oldham County coaches and administrators in that.
Well, I'm not familiar with her work explicitly, but cognitive coaching is, I just wrote a blog piece, something about wanting to be a facilitator.
Yes. And
a lot of those things are asking great questions.
Yes.
And that is really invaluable. One of our common friends, Fox DeMoisey, who is a cognitive coach in the district and friend of mine, when he worked with me in my classroom, and I asked him to work with me, and I was happy to have him work with me. I don't know that people understand the absolute value of having somebody who's really good at just asking great questions and sort of pushing and prodding you in that way.
Yes.
That cognitive coaching model that really, it really is super, super valuable. And it's not just, when we think about facilitation, that's really a lot of cognitive coaching traits and things like that. And have you had an opportunity to get your teachers some of that? Because I really think that teaching could almost be relabeled as cognitive coaching in so many respects, right?
Well, I think what, in the professional sense, having that cognitive coaching background and having that be really, you're centered in two things. You're centered in paraphrasing back to the person what they've just communicated, to ensure that that was indeed what they intended to communicate. Because oftentimes you will speak off the cuff, and especially in a highly emotionally charged situations that lots of educators find themselves in, will speak off the cuff, but that's really not our heart. It's not really what we're feeling or mean to communicate. It's just spouting or venting. And then asking those questions that are intended to set the educator on a path to discovering for themselves the answer that they need. And what that does is changes the hierarchy. We were talking earlier about flattening that hierarchy. That no longer makes me the expert on what that person needs. It simply makes me someone who might have a 360,000 square foot view. You know what I mean? And I'm looking at it from all angles. And they really, as the expert in their content, as a professional, have all of the answers that they need. They have all of the expertise. And one of the things that I love about taking someone through a coaching conversation is that when the person emerges from a great coaching conversation, they feel empowered, they feel clear, and they feel like they have some steps in the next direction. But none of those things come from me as their boss. It came from them. All I did was just ask some questions.
Sort of help setting that scenario for them to discover it. And I think that was one of the things that I had mentioned. So in a facilitation of a workshop, in that context, and the same thing as a boss sometimes, or leader or a teacher, trying to sort of avoid that temptation of being the big shot. Like, I'm going to say this wonderful thing, and it's like there's oohs and ahs sometimes, but it's like the power of having that person come to that realization on their own is really the value there, because that's that profound thought on their behalf propels them forward, whether it's a workshop or a gray, bleary day in February when you're sick of looking at the kids.
And they're sick of looking at you.
They're sick of looking at you, and there's, when is this going to end? How come we don't have a holiday coming up? Those kinds of things. Right? So let's kind of go down that road.
Yes.
You talked about your doctoral dissertation in leadership coaching, right?
Yes.
So talk a little bit more about that. I know you're proud of that work and how it started, but where it's going, and let's expand on that.
So when I came into my first year as principal, I borrowed from a mentor principal of mine, Christine Powell, who really was the first principal that I had that said, you really need to be an administrator. And I said, heck no. And she said, yes, I really think you need to be an administrator. So she believed it for me before I believed it for myself. Mm-hmm. One thing that she did when she came into our building here at East was she met with each one of us and asked us what we needed from her to be a better professional. Mm-hmm. And so I borrowed that and met with all of the staff members that I could get a hold of between July 15th when I was hired and the beginning of the school year. One of the people I met with was my instructional coach, Amanda Gift. And Amanda and I had worked together as co-instructional coaches here in Shelby County, so we already knew each other. But when I asked her, what do you need for me to be the best professional that you can be? One of the things that she wanted was to grow the coaching culture here at East Middle School. She felt like the perception of coaching, instructional coaching, was that it was to go in and fix teachers. Mm. And so therefore people were either resistant to inviting the coach in because they felt like they were going to be judged. Right. Or they were feeling like, well, if I ask for coaching, then that means I must be bad at my job. Right, or I must be a bad teacher. Yeah. So I decided to be very open and honest with the rest of the staff about the fact that Amanda would be coaching me as well as anybody else who wanted to be coached. And one of the things that I asked her to coach me in, because since I wasn't a classroom instructor anymore, I needed to rethink what I needed coaching in. And as a new administrator, I knew that I needed to stay the course of my original intent of what I saw were the needs for East Middle School. Mm-hmm. And so she coached me around, first and foremost, making sure that we were elevating instruction mm-hmm. in all areas. And so providing teachers with personalized professional development opportunities and making sure that I had a budget that supported that and make sure that I had time in the calendar year to support that. The second thing that I asked her to coach me on, which was really more personal, was making sure that I stayed focused on building strong teams. I had just finished as an instructional coach reading Elena Aguilar's Art of Coaching Teams, and I knew that we were going to get nowhere fast here at East Middle, either with culture and climate or with achievement, if we did not have strong, trusting teams. And so that was another goal of mine, to build an efficacious and rock star operating team from the administration team down to the teaching teams, and then for teaching teams to build strong student teams. And so that was what I asked Amanda to coach me on. So
are you familiar with Zig Ziglar?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think this is who it comes from. And from my years, for full disclosure, I actually used to work up the road for listeners at Shelby County High School. So I have experience in this district, which is not terribly relevant to this, other than the fact that the story that I had heard, this preceded me, was a principal of Shelby County High School years ago used to say on the announcements, I think, regularly, a Zig Ziglar phrase, which was, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing.
Right.
Which is a really, really hard thing to do.
It is.
For teachers and principals and keeping that focused. One of the pieces of being a principal that I've not been a principal. My mom was a principal. But I anticipate, and I was pushed by folks at some point to be a principal. And I don't know that I was cut out for it. But the idea that a principal, there's a sort of an illusion that I'm sure you have like the experience, and if not, I'm curious why not, but that you have this absolute autonomy, when in reality, you are probably in one of the worst spots as far as autonomy, because you have every single stakeholder coming at you. Students, teachers, parents, probably board members, superintendent, central office staff.
Yes.
And how do you fight those things off? And maybe that's a negative way to put it. I don't mean to put it that way, but sort of keep that focus, because there are, districts and schools, we're known for, like, what's the next shiny thing, right? How do you keep that focus? How do you fight those things off?
Well, I credit through my principalship program at U of L, which I can't recommend enough, because I thought it was a stellar program then. It still is now. I had lots of mentors through that program, both peers and professors, who said, when you go into this work, you better know what you believe about education. Right. You better know what you believe about teaching and learning, because when you get into this work, there are going to be a lot of people that are going to tell you what you should believe. Mm-hmm. So if you're not firm in the why of what you're doing, you're going to be swayed by every shiny new thing that comes down the path.
Shift it, see, Yeah.
Yes. So one of the things that I believe about education is that it is about good instruction. It is not about the technology you have in your hand. Mm-hmm. It is not about the professional development that you've been provided. It's not about the boss that you have. It's not about the students that you have. It comes down to good instructional practice, and then monitoring that instruction to see if it's having an effect on the kids that you're, trying it out on. Right. So that is fully my instructional belief. Mm-hmm. My belief about teaching and about education, and it's going to sound so cheesy, but I really do believe, kind of like, happy wife, happy life. Mm-hmm. You've got to have teachers that can find joy and purpose in this work, or else they are not going to be able to create joyful, purposeful classrooms. And so those are the two beliefs that I hold on to. Every decision that I make is rooted in those two beliefs. However, like you said, everything that comes across my desk, whether it come from a student, a peer, a counselor, the secretary, my superintendent, whoever, it's urgent to somebody. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But all of those things cannot be urgent to me. Right. Or else all I would do is sit in this office all day and answer emails, which doesn't make me a very good instructional leader. Right. So I have to say I'm glad that during my first year principalship, I'm also taking a class through my doctoral work at U of L from Blake Hazelton, who used to be the superintendent at in Oldham County. Right. One of the things that he has made the root of our focus for the class is being able to prioritize and delegate through the lens of what's important for your building and your people. Mm-hmm. And I think that has been a saving grace for me. I can't say that this year, being a new principal, that I have not had moments where I've had to shut the office door and say, oh my God, what do I do next? Right. I've had those moments. I've had moments where I just had to walk away from the desk and know that nobody was going to come and steal anything off my desk and do it for me. It was going to be waiting for me there tomorrow morning, and that it was going to be okay. Right. But you're right. The sense of urgency, I think, the fact that whenever anybody wants to know something from the principal, it's urgent for them for some way, shape, or form. But it can't always be urgent for me. And I have to know how to put the things in place so that whatever I consider urgent is going to make the biggest impact in teaching and learning.
Yeah, that's a great focus. I used to joke with folks when I was a department head years ago that, especially new teachers, I would say, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but I would say when administration asks you to do something, as a general rule, and jokingly say, I would wait till the third time till you hear it, because if you did everything that they asked you to do, you'd just be bogged down in doing all of those things, and You'd lose the ability to do what you needed to do yourself. And if they asked a second time, they might be serious. If they asked a third time, well, they're probably pretty serious. They've thought through this, but again, jokingly, right?
Yes, right.
Wink, wink, right?
Because I never push people.
So you mentioned personalized PD, which is certainly something that we try to work on. I'm curious in the constructs and the structures and parameters of school days and school weeks and PD days and things like that. What would you say, or do you have, and maybe you don't, because now I'm soliciting advice from our perspective as a PD provider, what would help you do a better job of being able to provide personalized PD, not from us per se, and not necessarily from outside PD partners, but what structures as a principal would you like to have, would you like to see differently so that you could maybe provide better PD, or your teachers could get better PD, or anybody in your building get better PD?
Well, I think we're on our way in our district anyway by opening up lots of opportunities for colleagues to learn from one another. I think we're also getting better, though, to make sure that those are high quality learning experiences. That's the rub about the grassroots movement of colleague professional development, is that and I think we as administrators have to ask ourselves, we have to look at what are the vetting processes,
right.
Because you don't want to go in and have someone's time wasted ultimately. Right. And so I still think that there's absolutely a time and a place for experts to come in and to facilitate PD, because they have had the time and the expertise and the connections to be able to look at the research, to be able to make sure that what they're touting as effective certainly has been proven by being studied and by being reviewed. That's not always the case with colleague PD. Right. But I do believe in high quality collegial teacher-to-teacher professional development because, first of all, I'm a collaborative person in nature, and some of the best lessons that I've learned are from my peers and from my colleagues. But also because it is instantly a more trusting situation, because the person beside you has street cred.
Right.
You know that they're in the trenches with you and they have boots on the ground.
Right.
And so immediately it softens your defense mechanisms and you can really listen to what it is that they're doing in their classroom and how they are proving it effective. And that really is my vetting process. Whenever I have teachers learning from one another, it is only after, not because they've found something really cool on Pinterest and they've put it in, the kids really loved it. That's not enough. If they can prove through an action research project that it's made a difference to student learning, then we know it's a high quality collegial opportunity.
Well, I like the ideas of ed camps and teach meets and things.
Me too.
But, and I think your point is well taken, that it's not always, just because it's another teacher doesn't mean it's good. And having an outside provider doesn't mean it's good either.
Right.
But I think one of the things that we try to do as an outside provider, and I think would be helpful, or I wonder about with ed camps and teach meets, is in what ways are those supporting the mission and vision of the school, the district, or, whatever. I mean, even in the classroom, right? So it might be a really great PD ed camp session on something, but if that session isn't supporting the mission and vision of the school or the district, then in what way, is it really worth the time? And I think that's a piece that is often mistaken or missed.
Yes, and honestly, having been a participant in a PD that you have led, and this is in no way, shape, or form buttering you up.
Yes, she's endorsing TeachThought PD right now.
Yes, I am. But knowing that your approach to that professional development, it models what it is that you would like for teachers to go back and implement in their classrooms. So you're not going in saying, this is your magic bullet.
Right.
It's going to fix all the ills that you have socially, economically, academically in your building. And if you do it this way,
Right.
exactly, and pay all the money, and make sure that you invite us back for additional charges so that we
Right.
can consult with you later,
Right.
because we all know that there are those out there.
Mm-hmm.
You really had a nice, when I went through your PBL training,
Mm-hmm.
you had a nice amount of time set aside for each individual that was working through the workshop part of the process to develop something that really they could use. And so having that opportunity for different schools to say, okay, that I can take this and I can implement it this way so that it does meet our mission and vision.
Right.
There's nothing that turns me off faster than for someone to want to come into the school and offer a magic bullet.
Right.
Because there are none.
Yeah, the mission and vision, and I think about, I was actually talking with a school leader, I won't say where from, but really trying to get them to understand or help them understand and the importance of saying, how are we going to implement whatever it is, PBL, growth mindset work, differentiation, tech integration,
Yes.
how are we going to align that with our mission and vision, and doing that through inquiry of what's our mission question, and turning that mission statement into a question, unpacking need to knows, which is essentially a PBL process. But yeah, I mean, the check is in the mail for the implicit endorsement there. I appreciate
Thanks.
that.
Yes.
But thinking about how to overcome those barriers as a PD provider, that's difficult because, like you said, when we walk in, there's instantly some folks who would be defensive. There's also overcoming the obstacle because when we say, for example, PBL, which is a pretty big shift, and I like to use that as an example because it is one of the bigger shifts, that it's not something that happens with a workshop. It's something that happens over time, which means that it's likely you should be asking us to come back and support that. But then, like you say, there are folks who sort of take advantage of that. And so for us, that's a challenge getting past that. I would imagine, one of the things I think would be frustrating as a principal and was frustrating as a teacher in PD is the structures of having PD days and sort of that dichotomy that, like, okay, there's PD days and PD time, and then there's teaching, which should not really be there. And it's really shouldn't be about hours, but it a lot of times is. And for us trying to figure out how we can innovate in ways that we can help teachers and schools outside of just those PD days, which is like virtual coaching and, things like that. But structurally, would there be differences that you'd make in your school day or school year if you had complete autonomy?
Well, I think if I had, if I had complete autonomy, and again, I really am blessed to work in a district that gives a whole lot of autonomy to professional learning, to the buildings and to the principals. I'll just, for instance, the middle and high school principals decided that we needed a common work that combined, because we are a standards-based grading district, we needed to have Dr. Gusky and Dr. Coleman come to us and talk about, from the University of Kentucky, talk to us about how standards-based grading and deeper learning connect to one another, because our staff needs that. And so we were able to solicit our staff developer and our chief academic officer, Susan Dougal, to be able to pull for a whole day where we could learn in that together. And so what used to be a mandated kind of seat time, we're going to provide you this and you're going to choose this, now has become really designed by us for what we need, and we decide that as a collective.
Right.
The other PD day that's mandated by our district, I am able as an administrator to use it in any way that I see fit. So my goal this year is to make sure that we spend a good amount of that day developing collective agreements on every level of strong teams. I said, one of the things that I believe about being a professional is that strong teams create happy teachers They create teachers that feel empowered and supportive, and then they can go and create empowered and supported students. And so one of the things that we're going to do this year is make sure we spend that day working on collective agreements. What are our administration collective agreements? What do we need to communicate to people so that they can make decisions and not be afraid that I'm going to come back and say no? You know, just put that out, just put it out there. Here you go. Here's my blueprint. How you decorate your house within that blueprint is all up to you, professional.
Right.
Have at it. That was a huge shift this year. That was probably one of the most uncomfortable beginning of the year things for us. My staff wasn't comfortable making a lot of decisions that really needed to be in their laps. They wanted me to tell them what to do. Mm-hmm. But immediately when I tell them what to do, whose fault does it become when it doesn't work? Mine. Right. Not theirs, or, you know, it doesn't rely on them. So there were a lot of times when I said, you know what? Here's what I care about. Here are my parameters as the leader. The rest of it is up to you. Let me know how it goes. Let me know what I can do to support you.
I think there's an interesting parallel there, because that's what we want with kids, right? That's what we want with our students and teachers, to do the same thing. So we're giving those sort of ideals and targets to shoot for, and the walls in which they're working, so that they know where the boundaries are. There's a safety in that, but they can figure out, and that's a personalized piece that really gets at the heart of student-centered learning, right? Mm-hmm. And teacher-centered teaching, if you will, not that hierarchy of the principal saying this is how you're supposed to do it, and that's not instructional leadership. That's more of a dictatorship. And yeah, that's an interesting. I've not thought about it that way. That responsibility comes back to you as the one to be at blame, and it's not that you're delegating that to avoid responsibility, but the word empower is what we're after, right? There we're giving them autonomy and the mastery and the purpose that Daniel Pink talks about, which does create happy teachers and a great working environment. And we all know teachers need more money, or good teachers need more money, but the working conditions are the pieces. That's one of the things that can run you out of teaching in a heartbeat.
Yes.
Absolutely.
When I started teaching in the Catholic school system way back when, my first annual salary was $16,000. Now, as time has gone on and teachers have gotten raises and I've gotten more and more years under my belt, and now that I'm a principal, I'm making considerably more than that. Right. But I can honestly tell you that never did the dollar amount determine how joyful I was about my profession. And that is probably where I, kind of get into a little bit of ick when it comes to that merit pay kind of idea, because I think especially in education, and maybe I can't speak to other professions because I've never done anything but education, but I can speak to this one especially. If you're in it for the money and the paycheck, you're not going to find joy, because it doesn't matter. Every year brings new challenges. Every year brings a whole new cultural dynamic that you've got to be able to, and you've never arrived. I don't know of many other professions where you can say, honestly, in some way, shape, or form, you are a beginner every single year.
As a side note, I think I may have shared this at some point on the podcast before, but in my office at home, I have my grandmother's teaching contract, and her salary in 1916-17. Any guesses?
Oh, wow. I'd say not more than 10. Not even close?
It was, I think, $968 a year.
Oh!
Isn't that amazing? And she could be fired for change in condition or name, which was marriage or pregnancy.
Oh, yes.
So, there you go. So, you mentioned big challenges.
Yes.
And continuing challenges. What has been your biggest challenge either this year, or what do you anticipate your biggest challenge being going forward, or both?
I think the biggest challenge, not just for me, but for our entire team, for our entire profession really, is the fact that what happens inside these school walls is a microcosm of what happens in our society. Mm-hmm. The polarization of our communities, whether it be from politics or family structures or poverty or elections, mm-hmm. those problems, those negative feelings, they work their way into the school building. And so when you're looking at where you have to place your priority with kids, some of these kiddos don't have their Maslow needs met.
Right.
Their emotions are all over the place. Their social lives are all over the place.
And the adults too.
Yes. A lot of times they come to us with, things that really require more expertise mm-hmm. than we have in a school system or in a counseling system, and we need more mental health support.
Right.
So all of those things, naturally, they have to be met before you can get any learning done. And so when I've got a kiddo that comes in and, he doesn't want to come to school because, he's got some emotional issues that, he's got detachment problems or whatever the case may be, I've got to know that kid well enough to be able to meet him at the door, meet his Maslow needs so that somewhere along the lines he can climb blooms. And, and that is hard.
Yeah.
That is hard. And in a class of 30, when you've got one that has an immediate emotional need, and you've got to still continue with the learning of the other 29, mm-hmm. How it's hard to choose. It tears you up inside when you have to choose.
Yeah. The sense of having to be a proxy for family and parents was a struggle. That was always a challenge for me as a teacher. At some point there is, like you said, you have to sort of make a choice. You can't focus on teaching, thinking and learning, while at the same time, meeting those mm-hmm. basic needs. There's sometimes some overlap, but that sure. is a real.
So I think the biggest challenge this year, and it will continue, and it will be on the forefront of our goals for next year. We've done a lot of culture and climate work here at East Middle that needed to be done. Mm-hmm. I think my teachers feel joyful and happy and satisfied in their work this year in a way that that they're able to continue that on their own now. Now we need to focus on family engagement, mm-hmm. and we need to build trust with our community. Because once we build that trust with our community and our families, they'll trust us to meet those basic needs without stepping across any boundaries that they might have for us. And that's actually very freeing, because then we can coach a kiddo around character and mindsets and all of those kinds of things without a parent feeling like perhaps we've kind of encroached upon their territory. Mm-hmm. When they trust us and they know that we have their child's best interest in our hearts, they trust us to coach those life skills.
Right. So shifting gears a little bit to the role of a principal in hiring, and one of the things that I think could be a really powerful way to conduct an interview, and I've not sat in an interview with you, but we've talked about interviews in the past, and one of the things that I think could be a really interesting way to interview somebody would be to ask them to come up with questions for as if they were actually hiring you as a principal. So if I'm a teacher and I'm interviewing for that job, what questions might I ask or of you as a principal if I were hiring you? But in that same spirit, if I was a teacher and we were having a conversation about this, what questions would you think would be important for teachers who are trying to become a teacher in your building? What should they ask you as a principal? What would what would
wow.
resonate and come up on your radar as interesting questions or thoughtful or tell you a lot about their mindset and what their priorities and goals are?
That's interesting. I would love for a new teacher coming into my building to ask how the administration team is going to allow them to do their job to the best of their ability.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud of some of the systems and structures that we've created this year to allow teachers to do just that.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that burns teachers out the fastest is just having this need or this calling to teach, and then not really having systems and structures in place that allow them to do that work well.
Right.
So I would love for a new teacher to ask me that. I would also love for a new teacher coming into my building to ask how I feel about building relationships with middle schoolers. Because middle schoolers, if there is, and I'm sure every level would say this about their own level, but honestly, if you've got to get them in the affective. You have got to make emotional, relational connections with middle schoolers. They are in a lot of ways, the hardest to win trust. Elementary kids tend to trust all adults because they're kind of still in awe of the fact that you're older and bigger. And
there's a compliance factor there.
Starts to kind of, middle school is the time when I'm going to test out just how much of the boss this person is.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm going to test out just what this person's made of. Are they fake?
Right.
And I think that middle schoolers are masters at picking out people who are inauthentic.
Yeah. Do you think part of it is because there's really, middle school, as I taught middle school, I loved middle school teaching because you can be goofy and funny and kind of get away with it still, whereas high school, when you start to do that, they start to, yeah, whatever, dude. But they are clearly, and high school does too, but there's such an intense focus on middle school grade ages that they're trying to figure out who they are.
Yes.
And so there's that sense of insecurity that makes them instantly suspicious of just about anybody and everybody, probably including themselves.
Yes.
It seems like that's a factor there, or a dynamic at play there.
Growing the whole child becomes essential
Mm-hmm.
at the middle level, because you are at the same time that you're supporting young children as they enter middle school, you really are trying to grow their sense of being independent drivers of their own learning.
Right.
And that takes a whole lot of executive functioning skills that they don't have Common Core standards about.
So, thinking as a principal, when we talk about principal preparation, and
Yes.
you've spoken highly of your preparation.
Yes.
If somebody out there is thinking, I am a teacher now and I'd like to be a principal, I think somewhere down the road, I need to get into a principal admin certification program, any advice on what they should look for or avoid?
Yes, and I'm just gonna total transparency, because I'm big on that, big on transparency. I know this is a bias, and I know that there's going to be a whole camp of people who are going to argue with me. But I would say that at least a blended face-to-face and online instructional program would be at the very minimum of what you would want. I have a particular fear of online programs that, they want to do it cheaper, more time efficient, all of those things to make it easier.
All right, you can do this in your sleep.
Yes,
while it's
you
playing.
can, you can absolutely go home and just, do this all in your spare time.
Right.
There is nothing spare time about becoming an effective leader.
Mm-hmm.
It is intense work, and it requires iron sharpening iron. You need to surround yourself with people who are not afraid to question you and to push your thinking in different directions. And sometimes I just don't think we get that human connection.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of questioning, if we don't have face-to-face connections with the people who are growing us as leaders. I still rely on my cohort from the University of Louisville, still rely and keep in touch with my professors to bounce ideas off of, or to get validation, or to, still be a student of theirs. And I know from my assistant principal, who's fantastic and wonderful, and I can't say enough about him, makes me a better leader every day.
Mm-hmm.
But he and I talk about what he might have missed having done his program online.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, I did my master's in integrating technology online, and this was many, many years ago. And boy, it was convenient. I was traveling with kids at that point, doing the people-to-people program, so it was very helpful and convenient. But as far as the learning, it was not what I would have hoped for.
I'm really eager to get involved with what the Kentucky Department of Education has planned for some principal cohort work. And already they've started some partnerships with Eastern Kentucky University and Western Kentucky University, using practicing principals to advise on principal prep. And so I know they want to expand that program, and I'm eager to get involved with that. That is a passion of mine. I see myself one day when the administration season might be over for me to be in principal prep and, to be working at the college level, growing other leaders in this work. So it's a passion of mine.
That idea of reciprocal accountability, I think, is important to one of the sort of aha moments I had as a teacher, and I don't mean this in a way that it may come off as not the way I'm intending it, but I'll say it anyways, was when I realized that I didn't have to be scared of my principal. There was something that I had done in a classroom when I was teaching psychology. It was in good fun, in the holiday spirit, and I won't go into the details of that. But a student had a complaint to my principal, and he called me down. He says, did this happen? And I said, yes. And I said, in short, it was Christmas carols for the psychiatrically challenged. And it was, lighthearted jokes. It was, like OCD people would be jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle bells, having to do that over, right? And it was, you had to know the psychology,
right,
the diagnosis to get the joke. So in a sense, it was a formative assessment almost. Right. But he said, did that happen? I said, it did. And he said, do you think that was appropriate? And then I looked and I thought, well, if I didn't think it was appropriate, I wouldn't have done it. And he said, oh, okay. And we were done there. Like, I realized I didn't have to be afraid of a principal, nor should you. And I think a lot of teachers and a lot of buildings have that, whether they realize it or not, that there's that fear factor. Oh, the principal's coming in. I better, put on my dog and pony show. Right. Or, man, if they're going to ask me questions. But that reciprocal accountability of the leadership being willing to be questioned and needing to be questioned, that's a healthy relationship.
Yes.
And that's unfortunately, I think, probably too rare in our buildings.
Well, which is one of the reasons that my doctoral dissertation is going to be on leadership coaching. That is one of the things that my instructional coach in our own coaching cycle did for me. She kept her ear to the ground, and while maintaining confidentiality for the staff, brought to me things I needed to hear that might not have been real pleasant to hear.
Right.
I'm human, and I'm passionate about this work, and sometimes I can be annoyed with what's happening in a particular classroom because I can so clearly see the sense of urgency to change, but that might not be where the teacher is. And what Amanda would do for me was to help me make my message hearable.
Right.
Anytime that I had to deliver a tough piece of information or something that I thought was going to probably create some bristly situations, and every leader has to address those things throughout the year, I would plan out my message with her and make sure that I could make the message clear and important and critical if it needed to be critical, but also palatable, because I can get up there in front of the staff and rant and rave all I want to. If nobody hears me, it's not going to make any difference, and my blood pressure's high and nobody wins.
Yeah.
So that was what leadership coaching did for me also, was make sure that when I had an important message to deliver or something to tell the staff or to create a higher expectation for whatever, that it was a message that everybody could live with.
I had a principal many years ago who, in a staff meeting, reminded me of when you said that, said something to the effect of, this is how it's going to be, and if you're on board, then everything's gonna go well, and if not, we're gonna hammer you like hell.
Nice.
And I was like,
well, nothing will make me want to work harder than to have that kind of empowerment. Yes,
that's an empowering piece. So as we wrap up here, and I want to get you to give, social media or how folks might connect with you on Twitter, because I know you're on Twitter, but any book, resource, video, something that you've read, come across, digested, that you might recommend for folks, especially aspiring principals?
Right now, I am a fan of everything that Peter DeWitt does. And again, I'm not being paid by him or anything like that, but right now I've just finished reading Collaborative Leadership. It not only validates a lot of the things that I thought I believed about being a leader, but it also makes me think differently about flattening leadership and operating the school building more like a cog and some wheel rather than like a hierarchy. Because I just truly believe that empowered teachers are the ones that make the biggest difference in student learning. I know that it takes a strong leader to create that kind of atmosphere, but ultimately, the teachers are the heroes. And again, for the sake of sounding cheesy, that is what I believe. It is my job as the leader to make sure that they've got the resources and the time and the support to do heroic things.
Yeah, I think principals and administrators, instead of, again, teachers not being afraid of their principals, but really should almost view themselves as support staff, and it's not the case in a lot of districts. So, social media.
Yes.
And I know that you have Twitter, and you're on Twitter fairly often and tweet things from your building and outside of your building.
I do. My personal Twitter handle is at Jennifer H. Cox. And you can follow all the great things we do here in our school building at East MS Missiles.
Okay. And why do you think it's important? Because you do, maybe more than most, you're on Twitter and social media. Why is that important?
It is important, first and foremost, I want students to know that what they produce in this school building is worth sharing with the world. I am proud to bring any eyes into the building to see what our amazing students can accomplish. So that's one of the things that I hope will come through to our families, is that I'm amazingly amazed by these kids every day.
Right.
The second thing is to honor and validate and share some of the hard-working individuals that I have that are taking great risks in their belief systems about education for the sake of students. I have teachers in this building that are really starting to think differently about education, and thinking differently is scary. We're on some uncharted territory with personalized learning. That is scary. So I have to be able to celebrate with teachers when things go really well. And that's another reason. And also, I get a whole lot out of connecting with my professional learning network through social media. That was how you and I first connected.
It was, right?
Was through social media. I had no idea, because we didn't teach in the same building or at the same time here in Shelby County. So I didn't know you were a Shelby County guy.
Yeah.
Until then, and then me being as bold as I am, invited you for coffee so we can meet face to face because I'm a collaborative person. So, but there are lots of experts that you, in another world, you wouldn't have had access to. The idea that I could shoot Jim Knight at Kansas State the idea for my doctoral dissertation, and then to have him give me advice back. I mean, you couldn't have done that 5 or 10 years ago. So I get a whole lot out of building a rich professional learning network that not only validates my work, but also helps me think about things differently.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. It's been a really interesting conversation. I hope folks have found it helpful.
Well, thanks for thinking that I was worth listening to.
Yeah, of course. And if folks do have a question, tweet at her, email me, grow@teachthought.com, or tweet at me at dperkinsed or at TeachThoughtPD. So thank you.
Thanks.
That'll do it for today's podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and if you didn't hate it, please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening, and share it on social media wherever you feel comfortable. Speaking of social media, you can find us in all the normal places like Facebook, Twitter, Google+, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and please share us on those places as well. And don't forget about TeachThought Professional Development. You can find us there at teachthought.com/PD.